With every swipe on your Samsung device, you are interacting with the heritage of a dynasty that has weathered prison sentences, political upheavals, and sufficient controversy to bring down an entire country. This is more than a corporate history. It's the chronicle of a family who forged an empire so immense it fundamentally sculpted South Korea. The story starts with Lee Byung-chul, the son of a farmer who transformed a humble trading post into a burgeoning empire. It was carried forward by Lee Kun-hee, the perfectionist who resurrected Samsung from its own failures, famously torching millions in faulty products to instill a culture of excellence, and it now falls upon Lee Yong, the heir who has emerged from prison on 2 separate occasions. Astonishingly, he managed to reclaim his position of power each and every time. Hidden behind the smartphones we use and televisions we enjoy is an epic tale of soaring ambition, bitter betrayal, and high-stakes political maneuvering. It's a world where each decision carried a heavy price, every controversy etched a permanent scar, and each resurgence seemed utterly miraculous. In this episode, we delve into the life of the individual now navigating one of Earth's most influential empires. His throne was secured through a mix of genius, scandal, and a legacy he was never given the chance to decline. Prepare yourself, because after you learn the true narrative behind Samsung's governing family, your perception of big tech will be forever altered. To grasp how this dynasty ascended, we must travel back to its very origins, to the inception of the Samsung saga. Imagine a young boy from a remote village, a country subjugated by Japanese occupation, and a vision so delicate it might have been shattered like fine crystal in less capable hands. Long before the name Samsung was associated with cutting-edge technology, it was merely a small trading company founded in 1938. Located in Busan, it was quiet, unassuming, and easy to miss. Lee Byung-chul, its founder, was not born into a life of privilege. As the third son of a small landowner in Yong County, he was slated to manage the family's rice milling operation. He was meant for a quiet existence as regular as the changing seasons, yet his personal ambitions could not be so easily confined. They pulled at him relentlessly like an insistent gale. He departed for Tokyo in pursuit of an education and concepts far grander than his surroundings could offer. Upon his return to Korea in the 1930s, he possessed no fortune, only ambitious dreams and loaned funds. Nevertheless, he pressed onward. In 1938, he launched a trading firm dealing in noodle, sugar, and dried seafood. He called it Samsung, meaning 3 stars, a name symbolizing longevity. At that moment, history itself began to violently shift. The Second World War, followed by liberation and a devastating civil war, washed over Korea in one merciless wave after another. But while others perceived only destruction, Lee Byung-chul identified opportunities. He plunged into various industries, including textiles, insurance, and construction. Every single venture was audacious, and each gamble was greater than the one before. Then he made his most revolutionary move. He acquired machinery with a singular vision to create Korean goods for the Korean populace. In an economy choked by Japanese imports, this act was a bold defiance, almost seditious. Yet the public was yearning for products they could finally call their own. And as the nation painstakingly rebuilt itself from devastation, Samsung ascended in lockstep, unwavering, resolute, and seemingly destined for greatness. However, an empire constructed with such astonishing speed inevitably casts a very long shadow. And in the landscape of Korea, those shadows attract powerful adversaries. By the early 1960s, Samsung had evolved into one of South Korea's most recognized household names, but both its fate and that of the nation were about to be violently redrawn by force. On May 16, 1961, General Park Chung-hee orchestrated a coup that involved no bloodshed. Tanks methodically rolled into Seoul. The constitution was nullified. A military junta seized control of the nation in a single night. Park campaigned on a platform of reform and order. Yet concealed beneath this pledge was an insatiable appetite for unchecked power. For corporate titans like Lee Byung-chul, the very foundation of their world had cracked. Samsung was prospering but was certainly not invincible, and Lee suddenly found himself facing a critical choice: either resist the new order and forfeit everything, or adapt to the new regime. He was compelled to integrate himself into Park's stringent new vision for the future of Korea. This decision was effectively made for him long before he had any chance to argue his case. Merely months following the coup, the newly formed military government descended upon and confiscated Samsung's financial institution, Chaebol Bank, leveling accusations of embezzlement and bribery against him. In an instant, the reputation he had painstakingly constructed, as solid as granite, began to fracture. Public sentiment turned against him viciously. Journalists began to swarm, questioning if Samsung had been corrupt since its inception. The reality, however, was much simpler and far more strategic. This was not a campaign for morality. It was a clear and potent warning. Park Chung-hee needed the powerful business conglomerates, the Chaebol, to learn a simple lesson. Either you align with us or you will be dismantled. Lee did not fight back. He neither raged nor sought revenge. He instead opted for a strategy of patience, playing a protracted game, like a master who understands precisely when to concede and when to attack. In public, he tendered his resignation and issued an apology for the scandal. Behind closed doors, he started to align Samsung's objectives with Park's ambitious economic agenda, and the military government was quick to reward such loyalty. Before long, Samsung was the beneficiary of substantial government-backed loans, exclusive import licenses, and entry into massive infrastructure developments. Through this unwritten pact, both Samsung and the nation of South Korea were set on a course for profound transformation. Park's government had initiated a highly ambitious strategy, the 5-year Economic Development Plan, conceived to pull the nation from destitution and propel it toward becoming a modern industrial force. To achieve this, the government required allies large, agile, and utterly reliable corporations. Samsung swiftly became one of Park's most effective instruments. From 1962 until 1966, Samsung's growth was explosive. The company diversified into textiles, logistics, food production, and insurance services. Buoyed by the regime, it gained access to low-cost foreign capital, state-provided land, and protective tariffs that extinguished smaller rivals as if smothering a flame with a sodden blanket. This was not illicit, nor was it a coincidence. It was a calculated, unyielding, and incredibly successful strategy. By 1969, Samsung undertook its most daring venture yet. It entered the electronics sector through collaborations with Japanese firms such as Sanyo and NEC. This was a profoundly risky endeavor for a nation with virtually no consumer market for electronic products at the time. Yet, the government was adamant about achieving technological self-sufficiency. Samsung's very first product, a basic black and white television set, sold out almost immediately. Meanwhile, Lee Byung-chul was doing more than just building factories. He was cultivating deeper connections with the nation's most influential people. His consultations with President Park became more common, and his public addresses started to echo the administration's rhetoric of discipline and nationalistic pride. The once independent entrepreneur had transformed into a political collaborator, almost a power broker, but such alliances with authority always carry a significant price. Once you align with the state, disengaging becomes an impossibility, and the massive empire that Lee had constructed would find itself entangled in political scandals for many decades to follow. But before those tempests hit, Samsung had one more critical phase of growth ahead, one that would be entrusted to the succeeding generation. In 1987, as South Korea was consumed by widespread protests and moving toward democracy, a quiet transfer of power was taking place. Lee Byung-chul passed away, and his third son, Kun-hee, assumed the role of leadership. To many observers, he appeared to be an improbable successor, reserved, introspective, with a passion for horses, an art house cinema, and seldom making public appearances. His manner of speaking even sounded somewhat antiquated. Many underestimated him, seeing a philosopher rather than a warrior. However, beneath that placid surface was a brilliant strategist who grasped a harsh reality. Samsung was a giant in Korea, but a non-entity on the global stage. In Western markets, the brand was synonymous with inexpensive subpar electronics. So in 1993, during a management retreat in Frankfurt, Kun-hee delivered a single stunning directive to his executives. "Change everything," he commanded, "except for your wife and children." And he was utterly serious. Lee's ambition was for Samsung to be more than just profitable. He wanted it to be recognized among the world's most elite corporations. But to accomplish that monumental goal, he needed to tear down the very culture his own father had established. The instant he delivered what is now known as the legendary Frankfurt Declaration, the entire company's trajectory changed. Factories were temporarily closed. Whole departments were restructured as if they were obsolete architectural plans. Countless employees were compelled to acquire new skills or face dismissal. Lee implemented Six Sigma, a quality control methodology so rigorous that it regarded even the most minute imperfection as a catastrophic structural failure. Their televisions were winning prestigious global design accolades, and their smartphones began to seriously challenge the iPhone's dominance. The company's memory chip technology advanced so profoundly that even Apple, its most formidable competitor, had to depend on Samsung to produce the very soul of its devices. Consider the implications of that. Your greatest rival is forced to rely on you to fuel their most celebrated products. But Lee was far from finished sculpting the corporation. He escalated his focus on design recruiting, European engineers, Japanese specialists, and American marketing virtuosos. He made it a mandate that every Samsung phone must withstand a drop from shoulder height onto solid marble. Any person who did not meet his exacting standards was promptly reassigned, demoted, or discreetly dismissed. He commanded Samsung with the precision of a disciplined military unit. There was a rigid hierarchy, impeccable order, and relentless expectations, all guided by a vision sharp enough to slice through any uncertainty. He would often state, "If you are afraid of the future, you will never witness it. If you neglect to look forward, you will forever be left behind." And yet, despite this forward-thinking ambition, some divisions of the company continued to function like a feudal kingdom. This involved absolute control, unwavering loyalty, and a leader whose every word was treated as law. Lee Kun-hee maintained his dominance over Samsung through an intricate web of cross-shareholdings that interconnected dozens of affiliate companies. It was a structure so convoluted that it served as an impenetrable fortress, effectively walling off any potential challengers. Samsung was no longer just a company, it was an empire, and Lee was its sovereign. But even the mightiest empires cast long, dark shadows. As Samsung ascended to unprecedented heights, a quiet resistance started to build. By the 2000s, Korean society was undergoing a transformation. The younger generations were growing weary of the Chaebol system. They leveled accusations of corruption and unjust market dominance against conglomerates like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG. Lee's once invincible image started to show fractures. Then, in 2008, prosecutors initiated an investigation that would rattle Samsung to its very core. At this point, Samsung's presence was ubiquitous on phones, computers, televisions, and gadgets all across the globe. Its chips were the engine of global technology. Its massive screens illuminated malls from Los Angeles to Dubai. Within Silicon Valley, Samsung had emerged as a formidable threat. Back in Korea, however, Lee's most significant challenge wasn't a corporate rival, it was the legal system. In 2007, the situation detonated when a former Samsung lawyer, Kim Yong-chul, publicly alleged that the company had established a secret slush fund containing hundreds of millions of dollars. This money, he claimed, was funneled to bribe judges, politicians, and prosecutors. In his view, Samsung was not operating as a corporation, but was instead behaving like a shadow government. The nation was utterly shocked. People had often quipped about living in the Republic of Samsung, but now the true extent of that influence was subject to a formal investigation. Authorities conducted raids on Samsung's offices. High-level executives faced interrogation. Countless files were confiscated. And then, for the first time in the modern history of Korea, the unimaginable occurred. The king himself was being summoned to appear in court. In April of 2008, Lee Kun-hee faced indictment on charges including tax evasion and a breach of trust. Prosecutors contended that he had concealed company assets in accounts under borrowed names, fictitious identities used to evade taxes on billions. They further accused him of surreptitiously transferring the control of Samsung to his son Lee Yong by way of non-transparent agreements between subsidiary companies. This was more than just a case about finances. It was a confrontation over legacy, immense power, and the authentic story behind Samsung's meteoric ascent. Lee did not issue a blanket denial. He made an appearance on national television, offered a deep formal bow, and confessed to certain aspects of the misconduct. In Korea, a public bow is not a casual gesture. It is a profound ritual of shame. A few days later, he resigned. After dedicating 2 decades to building Samsung into a global powerhouse, his departure felt like a definitive end. But in the world of Chaebol politics, endings are seldom truly final. In 2009, he was convicted, fined $100 million, and received a suspended sentence. He never served a single day in prison. Then came an unexpected development. In 2010, South Korea successfully won its bid to host the Winter Olympics, and the government urgently needed Samsung's global influence. Lee, with his vast international network, was reinstated to the International Olympic Committee. Almost instantly, he was granted a presidential pardon. The justification provided was straightforward. It was in the national interest. Samsung was simply too vital to penalize, and Lee Kun-hee was too influential to incarcerate. He returned to his position at the company as if nothing had ever transpired. His authority was fully restored, his command over the empire even more secure than before. Lee Kun-hee knew that his time was diminishing, his health was in decline, and whispers about succession were circulating quietly throughout Samsung. At the very heart of these murmurs was his only son, Lee Yong. Tall, impeccably dressed, and educated internationally, he had the appearance of a leading man from a Korean television drama. Yet, concealed behind that composed facade, was an individual walking directly into a storm of controversy. By 2017, South Korea was in a state of chaos. The president faced impeachment, and millions of citizens took to the streets, holding candles and crying out for justice. This political firestorm was merely one dimension of the narrative. To grasp the complete picture, we must go back to 2016. Choi Soon-sil, the best friend and clandestine advisor to President Park Geun-hye, possessed no official government title. Nonetheless, she was discovered to be editing presidential speeches, exerting pressure on corporations, and directing funds into her personal foundations. One of the corporations with ties to her was Samsung. Prosecutors put forth allegations that Lee Yong had approved $38 million in bribes to Choi, seeking her support for a critical merger in 2015. The merger in question between Chil Industries and Samsung C&T was the very transaction that would solidify his control over the entire conglomerate. Samsung maintained that the payments were simply charitable donations, but incriminating evidence began to emerge. Emails, financial records, and even lavishly expensive horses, gifted to Choi's daughter, who was a competitive equestrian, all painted a consistent picture. Samsung was not just another corporation. It was a formidable power broker, and now its heir apparent was facing intense legal scrutiny. In January of 2017, in a development that sent shockwaves around the globe, Lee Yong was taken into custody. Photographed wearing a prison uniform and confined to a stark cold cell, he was thrust into the center of a national drama. The trial played out like a live spectacle, with every gesture scrutinized and every utterance analyzed. The prosecution depicted Samsung's leadership as a criminal enterprise, masquerading as a legitimate company. The defense team contended that Lee was merely a victim of a disintegrating presidency. The court ultimately sided with the prosecution. In August of 2017, Lee was declared guilty of bribery, embezzlement, and perjury. The court handed down a sentence of 5 years in prison. Samsung's hard-won reputation began to crumble. For a brief period, it appeared as though the dynasty had at last collapsed under the weight of its own transgressions. But then the narrative took another turn. 6 months later, in February of 2018, an appeals court decided to reduce his sentence. It invalidated several of the charges and suspended the rest. After spending 353 days incarcerated, Lee was once again a free man. The court reasoned that there was insufficient evidence to prove that the payments had directly led to political favors, marking yet another episode in Korea's extensive history of power influencing justice. And once more, Samsung had weathered the storm. The public's perception had fundamentally changed. For a great number of Koreans, Samsung was no longer a proud emblem of national success. It had transformed into a reflection of the profound fractures within their democracy. It served as a stark reminder of a nation more influenced by its chaebols than by its own people, and for Lee Yong, his newfound freedom was cast in shadow. While the legal system had set him free, he had lost something invaluable. The trust of the public remained far beyond his grasp. For a short time, it seemed he might regain his balance. He re-entered public life, dressed in somber suits, delivering humble apologies and vowing to create a reformed Samsung. He went so far as to promise an end to the family dynasty, stating that he would be the final member of the Lee family to occupy the top position. Then, in 2020, the carefully constructed facade crumbled once again. A fresh investigation revealed that Samsung had manipulated its financial statements. These records had been altered to sway stock prices during the 2015 merger, the very same merger that had cemented Yong's authority over the empire. He was charged with violating capital market regulations, orchestrating accounting fraud, and once again abusing his power. And in January of 2021, history came full circle. Lee Yong was convicted for a second time and sentenced to serve 2.5 years in prison. He reported to the Seoul Detention Center with little fanfare. There were no cameras, no public pronouncements, just a quiet, solitary walk into confinement. It is a web of subsidiaries, each holding stakes in the others, creating an intricate circle of ownership that only the Lee family truly comprehends. Following Lee Kun-hee's passing in 2020, Yong didn't just inherit a fortune. He was handed the reins to the entire colossal enterprise. This inheritance, however, carried an astronomical price tag, an inheritance tax bill exceeding $10 billion, the most substantial in the history of Korea. To settle this debt, the family liquidated shares, contributed priceless art, and restructured segments of their vast conglomerate, all while meticulously ensuring they never relinquished ultimate authority. At present, Samsung's economic output accounts for almost 1/5 of South Korea's entire gross domestic product. Their semiconductors are the heart of smartphones globally. Their appliances are ubiquitous in households. Their emblem is displayed on stadiums, medical centers, legal institutions, and towering city skylines. Samsung's presence is inescapable, but victory always has its darker side. The ascent of the Lee dynasty has been punctuated by controversy-guarded secrets and an almost unbearable level of pressure. Beyond the sensational news reports is a sprawling family epic spanning 3 generations. It's a story of men born to immense power, shackled by its demands, and scrutinized by a populace that simultaneously relies on their success and harbors deep resentment for their pervasive influence. The patriarch Lee Byung-chul laid the groundwork. His son Lee Kun-hee transformed it into a global powerhouse, and the grandson Lee Yong was groomed from birth with one mission: to safeguard the legacy, regardless of the price. With every new development, Samsung's narrative veers away from a simple business chronicle and increasingly resembles the tale of a contemporary dynasty. This indeed is the astonishing saga behind the Samsung empire, a lineage that began in a humble storefront in Busan and grew to command one of the most formidable corporate empires on the planet. Throughout 3 generations, they have faced relentless scrutiny, damaging scandals, monumental achievements, and astonishing recoveries that defied all expectations. This saga is far from concluded, not by a long shot, and regardless of what the future holds, one reality remains undeniable. The trajectory of Samsung will inevitably influence our own lives. If you found this in-depth exploration compelling, be certain to like, subscribe, and activate notifications so you won't miss the next installment from Behind the Curtain. Thank you for watching, and always stay inquisitive.